Bone, More Tall Tales by Jeff Smith with Tom Sniegoski. I've talked about the Bone comics once before on this channel, and I'll link to that video in the description down below. But just to recap briefly, the Bone comics is an epic adventure that is either printed in one volume, if you buy the one volume Bone Epic, which is what I did, or got it out from the library rather, or it's also published in 9 volumes that you can see here, which recounts the adventures of Phone Bone and his 2 cousins, Phony Bone and Smiley Bone, who get sucked into this epic battle in a fantasy world. But in addition to the main epic, which I already reviewed on this channel, there are various sequels, prequels, and other addendum, which you can see here in these other books. And this is one of the, I guess, other addendum. This is Bone, More Tall Tales. Now, the reason this is called More Tall Tales is because there's a previous book called Bone, Tall Tales, which I actually have not read yet. This is the first book in the Bone series that I've read outside of the main story. So this is my first foray into the various addenda in the Bone franchise. The reason I picked this one up instead of the first Tall Tales is this happened to be the one that was sitting on my library shelf. But I am vaguely familiar with the concept through the Wikipedia article. Now, if you look at the Wikipedia article, the publication of all this gets a little bit complicated. So a lot of the stories in both Bone Tall Tales and More Tall Tales were originally published elsewhere in different compilations, such as Bone Coda or Stupid Rat Creatures or something like that. These are names of other books. But if you put that aside, it's currently being packaged by Scholastic as Bone Tall Tales and Bone More Tall Tales, and that's simple enough. Just forget about the publishing history of some of these stories. So there is a number of tall tales in here, I guess 5, by different authors and different artists. So it starts off being written by Jeff Smith, written and illustrated by Jeff Smith. But then as we move through the different tall tales, they are written and illustrated by different writers and illustrators, which causes some differences in style. So if you're familiar with the canonical Bone story, you might recognize some of these creatures here, but drawn by a different artist and looking slightly different. I guess for comic book fans, this is nothing new, huh? We're used to seeing our favorite comic book characters being interpreted by a number of different artists. But the frame story meaning the Bones are going out on a camping trip and telling tall tales, is illustrated by Jeff Smith, the author of the original Bone story. So you do get familiar looking artwork, at least at the beginning of the story. And the frame story for this is that Smiley Bone and Phone Bone and Bartleby, and then 3, I guess, junior Cub Scouts, are going out camping, and then around the campfire they tell different tall tales. Now, the 5 tales that they tell are all good. They're aimed squarely at children's sensibilities, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly nice little distractions, nice little addenda to the main Bone storyline. The frame story doesn't appear to entirely make sense. I mean, the first story is all right, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But the second story, Bartleby, is telling a story about how the two stupid rat creatures from the original Bone story developed their love of quiche. So it's kind of a prequel explaining the quirks of one of these stupid rat creatures who loves quiche in the main story. And Bartleby really should not be in a position to know this story because in the original Bone epic, as far as I can remember, at no point did Bartleby spend any significant amount of time with the other rat creatures or the two stupid rat creatures. So there's no way he would have known this story. And the follow-up story that Bartleby tells about Riblet as well, you wonder where he would have known that. And then, yeah, the final story, which is about Big Johnson Bone on the moon, is told by Todd. But the odd thing is, in the beginning, Todd expresses skepticism about this very story. So you can see Todd here. That's a tall tale. He did not go to the moon. He did. That would have been back in frontier times. It's impossible. So here Todd is saying that the story is impossible. But then when it comes to tell the story, Todd ends up being actually the one who tells the story. Now, the way to explain away all of this is that the hat apparently seems to have some sort of magical powers. It's a little bit unclear if this is something that actually happens or if this is just one of Smiley Bone's superstitions that the other characters are going along with. And again, maybe some of this would have made more sense if I would have read the first Tall Tales before jumping to more Tall Tales. I'll try and work my way around to reading the first Tall Tales at some point eventually. But anyways, that's the frame story. Now let's go back and maybe look at some of these in a little bit more detail. First we have the frontispiece hanging out, which we can see right here with Big Johnson Bone. We'll come back to him. Having tied up the two stupid rat creatures and hanging them off of a pole. Now, this is interesting, but it doesn't connect with anything in the rest of the book. At no point in the rest of the book do we see Big Johnson Bone interact with the stupid rat creatures at all. Possibly, again, this is part of the original Tall Tales book. I don't know, but we'll leave that aside. Okay, then we move into the frame story. And then Phone Bone tells Coda, which is a story about what happens to the three bones when they're on their way back to Boneville and they have one last adventure along the way. Now, this is great. It's classic Bone storytelling with the three cousins. In fact, it's so nice that you almost regret that it wasn't part of the original Bone epic, because it in one sense it would have fit in perfectly. In another sense, it wouldn't have fit in perfectly as well, because it would have been an extra ending after the ending that was already on there. So, you know, just in terms of the pacing of the story, it would have felt a little bit strange. But as an extra little added ending that comes in a separate book, it works great. Now, this story assumes that you have knowledge of the previous story, the previous Bone epic. And there are all sorts of little tidbits in here that make reference to events or characters or character quirks from the original story. So the assumption is not only that you've already read the original story, but that you remember it quite well. And that's true with actually all many of the other tall tales in this collection. They seem to be assuming that you've read and reread the Bone Epic a few times and remember all the characters and details quite well, so that you're able to catch all these little references. Yeah, I'll come back to that maybe in a little bit. So anyways, that's a fun little story. Next we have a tale by Bartleby, which I already referenced before, The Night of the Quiche, which is how one of the rat creatures developed his love of quiche. Then we have another tale by Bartleby. This one is called Riblet, and it's about a baby pig, or I guess a baby boar, who is terrorizing the forest and then gets abducted by the two stupid rat creatures, and so ends up terrorizing them. It's all right. It certainly works. It's pure slapstick. So, like Tom and Jerry type things. Characters getting hit on the heads with sticks and stuff like that. I don't know. I felt that the story kept me a little bit at arm's length because there were absolutely no likable characters in it. I mean, the two stupid rat creatures are comical, but maybe not particularly likable. Riblet is portrayed as just psychotic. So, he's not like a cute little protagonist. He's just a psychotic cartoon character. So I think we all know that Tom and Jerry is ultra violent, and there's a big history of violence in cartoons and stuff like that. But Jerry is actually likable. I mean, I think for these kind of cartoons to actually really work, you need at least one likable character. This doesn't work in that sense, but it does work in the sense that it's fairly short. So, I'm not sure if I would sign on for a Riblet franchise, but for just this one story, fine. It's fine. It goes on a little bit long. It's, I think, one of the longer stories in this collection, but yeah, it's fine. We have another little story here, starring the small forest mammals, again from the original Bone Epic, Crocogator, which is, not much of a story, but for something that only takes up a few pages, it's fine, I guess. Yeah, it's fine. And the artwork is well done, and it's all right. And then we have Big Johnson Bone. Now, Big Johnson Bone, I think, first appeared in the Stupid Rat Creature Tales, according to Wikipedia, which was repackaged as Tall Tales and More Tall Tales. So he's Big Johnson Bone is like the legendary ancestor of Boneville, or the Bone Brothers. I knew who he was because of reading up on this franchise on Wikipedia. If I didn't know that, I guess I would have been mildly confused. But apparently, he was first introduced at least in this repackaged reprinting. He's first introduced in Tall Tales. And here's another story about him, Moon Goon in June, in which he goes to the moon and has a fight there. And it's a fun little story. It's, it's fairly short, but they're all fairly short. It's It's fun. It's funny. It's great for kids. And then at the end, spoilers. Big Johnson Bone appears. I guess he's got an abnormally long lifespan, and takes back the big hat. And that's the end of the story. Sorry, that's the end of the book, more or less. So, it was entertaining to read. It was a little addition to the Bone franchise that didn't really need to be there. I guess either because the fans really were demanding it, or because the publishers wanted more cash, or maybe a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. But despite the fact that we don't really need this extra book, it's fun enough. More geared towards children, obviously, but even as an adult, I had fun reading it. The thing I would wonder slightly is whether it's worth purchasing this for something that you can read in just a couple hours. I mean, this is only 107 pages. You can see these are very quick read pages. But I looked this up actually on the internet to see how much this is going for, and it does appear to vary from website to website. But it's either $12 or $8, depending on which website you buy it off of. And I thought, okay, for $8, maybe this is worth $8. Maybe it's about $8 worth of entertainment. I mean, you'd pay $8 to go to the cinema, right? So you could pay $8 for a book, which will last you maybe a couple hours to read from cover to cover. But if at all possible, the best way to do it is just to get it out of the library, like I did, because I'm not sure. As an adult, you would get a lot of reread value out of this. So it might not be worth the money, but if you find it in your library, great. My kids, though, have absolutely been loving this book. I thought I'd read a little bit of it with them, and they just loved it. They've been wanting to read and reread it by themselves. So, if you have kids, then maybe that calculation would change, huh? Maybe the $12 for them to read it several times would be well worth it. Now, they actually have not read the original Bone epic. So they had a lot of questions about who these characters were and what they were doing. But they it's very appealing, colorful artwork that kind of sucks them right in. And they were able to tell most of what was going on, and then they asked questions about anything they didn't understand. So it's not intended to be an introduction to the Bone franchise, but they jumped right in with it. Although as I was reading some of it with them in the living room, my dad came by. He said, "Wow, that is such a violent book." Some of this can be a little bit violent. It's cartoon violence, Tom and Jerry type stuff. But yeah, there was a lot of that in some of these stories. Sorry. Flipping here to the About the Authors section, Jeff Smith is really the only one I knew. He's the one who did the original Bone. But it looks like they all have impressive resumes. So Stan Sakai, I didn't know this, but he's the guy who did the Usagi Ujimbo books, part of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise. So, I guess these are all accomplished people who are contributing to this book. And then we have what I thought was a rather bizarre decision, which is to include an excerpt from the original Bone epic, the first book in the series. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because throughout the time you're reading this book, Bone More Tall Tales, it's assuming an intimate familiarity with the original Bone epic. So, who is this targeted to? Somebody who would pick this book up without reading the original Bone epic? Well, you never know, actually. Like I said, for my kids, it was their first introduction to Bone, so maybe some people are reading this book as their first Bone series book just because this is what they happened to stumble upon in the library. So it gives a few pages from the first Bone book, and then ends on a rather odd note. If they had gone just a few more pages, they could have had a much better cliffhanger. If you're familiar with the original Bone epic, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then just ends here. To find out what happens next, buy the Out from Boneville book. It just ends. Well, yeah. But there you go. So that is Bone, More Tall Tales. I don't know if I would recommend purchasing this, but it's definitely worth checking out from your library if you see it.